What's up, everybody? Welcome in. It is Iowa Hawkeyes Primetime Live, Iowa at the voice of college football. We are your hosts this evening. I'm Josh Elmer. He's Zach Heine. And, of course, this is Iowa at the voice of college football, Iowa Primetime Live. But, of course, we also one half of the HawkeyesWire.com team. So check out our written work over there, HawkeyesWire.com. Okay, well, we are sub 30 days, almost 25 days out from Iowa football. The season, it is getting oh so close, baby. And we've got some camp news and notes to go over. It sounds like the wide receivers have been impressive for the Iowa Hawkeyes, which is great to hear. Gronowski continues to impress. No big surprise there. We can keep repurposing some of the Big Ten Media Days audio. So we'll do that tonight. Plus your comments, your thoughts out there, whatever you want to dive into. Yes, Chevy Oda, good evening. I see you in the chat. Kids practice coming this Saturday. Kids Day at Kinnick sneaking up. So, and we'll have a big media blowout before that on Friday. So there will be a lot to discuss. And, of course, Kirk Ferentz, as is the annual tradition, he will meet with the media after that open practice, our final open practice of the spring and into the fall. Before we boot this season off, we'll hear from Kirk Ferentz on Saturday as he reacts to a lot of what happens from the Kids Day at Kinnick practice. But, okay, let's start here. Good evening, everyone. Great to have you. Iowa Hawkeyes Primetime Live, Iowa at the voice of college football. And I guess I should say good evening, Zach, to you as well, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing great, Josh. Doing great. Happy to be here. Super excited for Iowa football. That's, just around the corner. And, a lot of questions are going to be answered over the next couple of weeks and couple of months about this Iowa football team. So just excited to get in and talk about that.
Well, let's dive right in. The breaking news of the day, we've got ourselves a legitimate, not a, hey, here's my way too early poll, and here's what this media outlet or HawkeyesWire.com, not what we came up with our top 25. We got a legitimate US LBM Coaches Poll top 25, and we'll just go with the tidy on 3 graphic here to start this evening. Here's what it looks like. And you can see from an Iowa perspective, the Hawkeyes omitted from the preseason top 25 poll. So no Iowa inside the poll to start. And I think just the initial question, did Iowa get snubbed in your mind in the preseason top 25?
I think in a sense that they did, and it's more so looking at the others receiving votes. I think that's the big question for me. And like, you could make an opinion that, or an argument that Iowa should be in the top 25. But I think when you look at the other teams receiving votes, I think that's where some of my quarrels are with the list. Like Auburn was right above them with 50 votes. Auburn's bringing in a brand new quarterback as well, and they got some question marks, and they play it in an extremely tough SEC. And so, should Auburn be ahead of Iowa? I don't know about that. USC is ahead of Iowa, and I've kind of been on record this offseason that I'm not a big fan of what Lincoln Riley's cooking up over at USC. I think he's a very average coach who's, had his stock kind of inflated by having some really good quarterbacks there and across his time at Oklahoma and now at USC with, Baker Mayfield to Kyler Murray to Caleb Williams. So I'm not sure exactly what I expect from a Lincoln Riley coached USC team this year. But out of the top 25 here, there's really one team that I think, shouldn't be there over Iowa, and that's BYU. They're facing huge question marks at the quarterback position with Jake Retzlaff no longer on the team because of some personal issues. And their quarterback room, I think they don't have a single player that's played a snap at the FBS level, or at least started a game at the FBS level. And it's in the Big 12, you're going to face a lot of good quarterbacks, and you're going to have to be able to keep up with them in those kind of shootout games. And so I'm not convinced that BYU will be a top 25 team this season. But I mean, you look at everyone else, I think it's a fair ranking. And, Iowa's got 4 opponents this season who are on the preseason top 25 and another 2 opponents who receive votes. So we're going to find out a lot. If Iowa wants to be in the top 25, they'll be able to prove it pretty early in the season within the first 5 weeks or so.
I'm split on it. I certainly can see the scenario where Iowa is in this poll. I think I probably would have voted Iowa in, the 20 to 25 range somewhere if I had the poll. So if that's your mindset, then you say, yeah, they did get snubbed, right? But I could certainly see some of the questions with the Hawkeyes. I could see where some folks wouldn't have Iowa on their ballots because, okay, well, you're replacing Jay Higgins. You're replacing Nick Jackson. It was an Iowa secondary a season ago that was not the Phil Parker secondary that we're accustomed to. And guess what? You're losing Quinn Schulte. You're losing Sebastian Castro from that secondary, right? So I get some of those questions with the defensive backfield and really just the back portion of that Iowa defense. Mark Gronowski, big-time pickup out of the transfer portal. We've talked all offseason about it with the Hawkeyes, what Gronowski can mean for this Iowa offense. And yet, Zach, he's got to go prove it in the Big Ten, right? He's making the jump from the FCS to Iowa, and he's got to go prove that he can be that Walter Payton Award winner, that type of quarterback that can elevate Iowa offensively. So I could see and understand where some out there nationally might be taking a little bit more of a wait-and-see approach with the quarterback that we think for Iowa will wind up being a commodity that morphs this Hawkeye offensive attack and adds the passing game. So I think that he's going to be that guy, Zach, but the bottom line is folks nationally are looking at this, and this is not to say, by the way, that everybody in this top 25 poll is existing here with no questions at quarterback of their own. You could go up and down this and find plenty of teams that have questions at quarterback. Oregon in the top 10 at number 7, questions at quarterback. Everybody likes more, right? But that's a question with what it's going to ultimately wind up being. We can go higher than that if you want. Gunnar Stockton at Georgia is not somebody that everybody's just dead set it's going to work out at quarterback for Georgia under center. Miami, obviously, they go and get Carson Beck, but is he going to be truly healthy this season? That's a question for Miami. Carson Beck wasn't all that great last season. He was kind of disappointing at Georgia a season ago when he was healthy. So there's a question there. Michigan, you got the very talented 5-star kid coming in that everybody wanted in Mr. Underwood, but that's going to be a question until proven otherwise. Ole Miss, I mean, it goes on and on. You could find more teams in this top 25 teams that are inside the poll that have their own questions at quarterback. But okay, so maybe that was a question with Iowa. So did they definitively get snubbed? I don't know that they did. I would have had Iowa in that 20 to 25 range for me. I haven't sat down and written out my own top 25 poll, Zach, but I think Iowa's good enough to merit inclusion there. I kind of like it. I don't mind that Iowa's on the outside of this thing looking in. It keeps this team hungry. They obviously have a big opponent waiting in week 2 on the road in Iowa State, and you just look nationally at what some folks out there are thinking, Zach. And we kind of knew this going in, but this US LBM preseason coaches poll, it just ratifies it, right? It just makes it reality that K-State and Iowa State in that non-conference game early in if it's okay, Josh Pate, with you that we call it week 0, in that week 0 game over in Ireland, that's a big early season game, and whoever wins that one between those two Big 12 foes, for Iowa, if it's Iowa State that emerges there with a win over Kansas State, if it's Iowa State victorious, that sets up a great proving ground opportunity for the Hawkeyes to jump right into this poll when you exit week 2, which probably most seasons, Zach, that's kind of the case, where if you win your first 2 and, oh, by the way, one of those is the Cy-Hawk game, probably you're jumping into all of the top 25 polls. So I say welcome aboard, motivation, a little bit of a chip on the shoulder.
Yeah, I think there's nothing wrong with Iowa going into this season, having something to prove to, themselves and the national media. I think I'm guilty of it at the very least, and probably a lot of people, watching are as well. As we look at this team with a big old pair of black and gold tinted glasses on sometimes, and we'll look at the positives and tend to just pass over some of the things that there are with legitimate question marks about that people nationally are pointing out. Like Iowa's wide receiver room is largely unproven to a national perspective. The tight end room is the same deal. The left tackle spot is a big question mark, and that linebacker room is really unproven. So, and I see why they're unranked in the coaches poll, just by the question marks that some national media members and coaches might have about Iowa entering this season. And I think it's ultimately good for them to be able to head into the season without the pressure of a top 25 ranking, because I think sometimes that can weigh on a team, especially a team that's going through some changes at key position groups. And so I think going in with a chip on their shoulder and playing as the underdog week 2 in Ames, I think that'll fit this team really well. I think they play some of their best ball when they are underdogs. I mean, look at the games at Kinnick where top teams have come in over the past decade or so, and they've pulled off the upset. Just something about Iowa being a betting underdog seems to awaken a different or awaken something in this team that they elevate their level of play. And so I think if they want to be a top 25 team, they got to earn it. They got to go on the road, take care of business to get against Iowa State, and then you'll have more chances with Indiana, Penn State, and Oregon to pick up some more big wins down the line. But being an underdog it's never a bad thing. It's never a bad thing to go into the end of the season with something to prove, and a way to keep the team humble for sure.
And I don't think anybody will be on this channel caught rooting for Iowa State in that opener versus Kansas State. But if Iowa State were to win, that wouldn't be all bad for Iowa. Then Iowa State comes in feeling good about itself. Okay, you can make the argument maybe you don't want Iowa State coming in and Becht and company altogether confident in what they're doing. I would entertain that argument, but just for Iowa, for its chance to make an impression naturally, and for its hopes to get into the college football playoff, wouldn't be all bad if Iowa State beats Kansas State and kind of climbs that national perception ladder a little bit before you see them in week 2. Let's talk to the people right off the top, and then let's dive into some more reactions from the top 25 as a whole, beyond just the black and gold tinted glasses, beyond the Iowa perspective. Just what did we make of the top 25 as a whole? Because I do have some reactions elsewhere that are not Iowa related. Kenton is in the house. What's up? Go Hawks, baby. Kenton, great to see you. Logan says hello. Love the show. Go Hawks. Aiden, I like not being ranked. Prove it, which was kind of, Zach, what you were saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's the mindset of a lot of Hawkeye fans, and even Hawkeye players. If you ask them, right now about their reaction to not being ranked, is going out just having to prove it on the field. And it's kind of weird, but I kind of am rooting for an Iowa State victory in that week 1 game, whatever you want to call it, against Kansas State, because I think if Iowa State loses that game, that's a really desperate team that's going to walk into Jack Trice Stadium in week 2, because they, if they lose to Iowa after losing in week 0, they're 0-2. All of a sudden, there's big question marks about, the trajectory of that season for Iowa State. Are they only going to win 7-8 games, like not make the Big 12 championship game? Like, there's going to be a lot of pressure on that team if they lose in week 0 to Kansas State. And I would have a feeling that they'd be coming in pretty desperate and looking for that victory over Iowa, where if they come in, win week 0, they're feeling good, but then they believe that they have an off week when Iowa plays Albany. So there's a chance that they're maybe a little rusty, feeling good about themselves. You can catch them off guard. So I'm actually kind of rooting for an Iowa State victory in week 0. Get their hopes up and get them, feeling good, and then Iowa comes into town and hopefully is able to take care of business from there.
get into town and just go ahead and rip that heart out. That would certainly make Hawkeye fans happy. Kenton, by the way, said, "What's up, Zach? Go Hawks, baby."
Hey, Kenton, how's it going?
Let's see here. T. Hink is in the house. Mr. Taylor Hink, is Hawkeyes Wire going to be at Iowa Media Day? T. Hink, it's one of the only things about this show and HawkeyesWire.com that drives me crazy is I don't get to get my own personal boots on the ground at media availabilities. At some point, Zach, who knows? Maybe your boots can get on the ground, but I can't speak for you. I know that that's at least not this week happening, but maybe at some point down the road that would be nice. I certainly would be all for that. That'd be great to have you on site for, again, as Chevy Oda points out, Kids Day practice coming up on Saturday, and there will be a lot coming out of it. I will certainly be, as every other year, I will be catching every last bit of the highlights that get put out. And there's quite a few media folks that just put the whole practice out. So I will sit down and I'll be like John Gruden over there. Not quite like John Gruden, but I'll be rewinding the tape and actually taking notes. And I will watch the same play 5, 6, 7 times, like, okay, that's this number. And then, frantic notes. So it's actually the open spring practice and Kids Day at Kinnick are two of the Iowa coverage days that I look forward to the most, because I get to feign like I am, in fact, a scout or a coach, Zach, even though this is very much not the case.
Yeah, I've been to the Kids Day practice and open practices before, and they're really fun to go over and check out. Not able to make it this year, as we mentioned earlier, but it's a good chance to check out, really for one of the first times all off season, how everything is kind of grooving together. And I mean, as you mentioned, you can watch the same play 4 or 5 times. You want to watch, okay, how's the offensive line? How's the left tackle look on this play? How was the route from Jacob Gill on this play? How did Mark Gronowski go through his progressions? How was the pressure from the defensive line up front? There's so many different things you can watch on and take away from one play, during these practices that, I don't blame you at all for sitting down and just, rewatching each play a bunch, because, there's a lot that you can learn from some position groups that have some question marks heading into the season.
And if you're anything like me, you can maybe glean a little bit too much.
From
watching and rewatching. I love to Zapruder film it, though. I really do enjoy it. Kenton, I believe Iowa did not get snubbed. They need to prove it by winning. First Iowa State, then Indiana, etc. And that's kind of the thought, right? Is, look, it would have been nice to have them inside the top 25. I can certainly sit here and make arguments for why they should. You got a lot coming back on the offensive line. We've talked about it, but on the interior in particular, with Logan Jones, with Bo Stevens. You got Jennings Dunker, who's one of the best offensive tackles in the Big Ten, and I think nationally as well, and Pro Football Focus, and some of these folks that, Zach, are indeed scouts, they think so too with Jennings Dunker. We'll see about left tackle. You just mentioned that, so that's a big-time fall camp question mark. It needs to be answered. Who's going to win that job? That's a position battle that we're all watching. The other guard position, we think right guard, that will be an interesting battle to watch throughout camp. So, look, not every question up front has been answered. We don't know what that starting 5 in totality looks like for Iowa, but I still point to offensive line, Zach, and say that's a reason to be optimistic for Iowa. I think regardless of how much you think you need to see from Mark Gronowski, clearly Iowa is going to be, if he stays upright, if he stays healthy, then clearly Iowa is going to be improved at quarterback. So that, I think, is a reason to be optimistic for Iowa. I've sat here and banged on the drum for I still love Kamari Moulton. I'm excited about T.J. Washington and Patterson and on, that McNeil, the group of running backs behind Kamari Moulton. So I'm not worried about this precipitous drop-off from what was admittedly a record-setting season for Caleb Johnson. So to me, the wide receivers we've talked about as well, we think it's one of the deepest wide receiver groups in some time. I'm pretty optimistic about Iowa taking a legitimate leap in 2025 offensively with a lot of the items that I just mentioned right there, Zach. But maybe that's not the case for everybody nationally. They need to see it a little bit more before they believe it. And frankly, with Iowa, where they've been offensively over the past half decade or so, though that's not entirely fair to Tim Lester that he has to go clean up all this garbage and carry it outside to the trash can. That's kind of the reputation that Iowa is working with. So I understand offensively where there is a little bit more that, hey, we got to see it to believe it. And I think that's maybe what Iowa is a little bit of a victim of, being just on the outside of this poll looking in. I guess I could do a better job of telling you as well that if you extrapolate this poll on out, you'd have OU 26, that's Oklahoma, Missouri 27, Louisville 28, USC 29, Utah, Baylor, Auburn, and then there's Iowa. So what does that put that? Iowa somewhere right there in the 30s, just outside the top 25. So they're one of the teams that's receiving the most votes outside the poll, but they are outside the poll with some questions for some to be answered.
Yeah, and they received more votes than Minnesota and Nebraska, even though I've heard from many Husker fans this season about how Nebraska's going to take this big step this year, and Dylan Raiola is the next great quarterback in the Big Ten and all this stuff. And so it's a notch in my belt right there that I was higher on the preseason poll than Nebraska is. Minnesota is high up there as well, and I like some of their returning pieces, but they got big quarterback question marks this season. So we'll see if that derails the boat a little bit up there in Minnesota. But I mean, I was in that top 30 to 35 range, which I think is pretty fair. I mentioned a couple teams earlier that I think are a little overrated. Maybe you can make an argument for with Iowa, but they're still fighting a big national media battle with the offense. Like, if you just and the casual viewer too, if you just ask the casual, college football viewer who isn't, engaging with Iowa football content daily about the Iowa offense, they're probably going to laugh in your face and, make a bunch of jokes about it. And it's unfair to Tim Lester. It's unfair to the current group of guys, but, that's been Iowa's reputation over the last half decade, is an offense that is laughably and comically bad, and that is the butt of many jokes nationwide. And so they're having to fight that national perspective and national battle, and they made good steps last year, and I think another improved season from that offense, and they'll start to kind of break away from the narratives that were surrounding the offense after 2023, which featured many a game with the offense doing basically nothing. And so, it's unfortunate that they're still fighting that narrative battle, but I think another improved season from the offense and from Tim Lester will, be able to move Iowa past that battle. But, in terms of the top 25, I think if we're moving on from an Iowa perspective onto a more national perspective, I think it's really interesting. A couple of things. I know we had someone in the comments, I think it was Kenton, who asked, why is Ohio State higher than Penn State? I think that's a great question to ponder about this top 25, because Penn State is kind of perceived as that top team in the Big Ten this year. Like, they got the big quarterback returning in Drew Aller, they got the running back duo Singleton, and gosh, what's the other running back's name? Nick Singleton and Katron Allen is the running back duo that's really good, and a defense that always has some star players with Dennis Sutton back this year. And so I think it's the James Franklin tax, though. I think that's why they're not ranked ahead of Ohio State, because Ohio State and Ryan Day just proved that he can win in the playoffs. He can win a national championship. Penn State has yet to prove that. They, they've come up comically short in big games the last couple of years, whether it's Michigan or Ohio State or, in the playoff game. So I think it's really the James Franklin tax that is the reason why they're not number two. And I agree with Cheviota too. The number one versus number two matchup, week one, Texas and Ohio State, is probably a big thing for TV ratings. That's a way for you to market, the top two teams in college football this season, number one versus number two. And week one, Fox is going to be all over that when they are marketing that game. So I think that's something to do with it as well. But I think, the coaching issues and can't win the big game are why they're not number 2.
I'll push back a little bit against that, certainly from the Texas perspective, that I think Texas is just the offseason national champion for so many this year.
Yeah.
And I don't know that it's just media hype with Arch Manning. I don't think they're just trying to build up a storyline. I think there's a lot of media folks that really think that Arch Manning will be an upgrade from Quinn Ewers, that he's the savior for the Texas Longhorns. And with Texas on their end of the equation, they've earned a little bit of respect by making a couple of trips to the college football playoff, by their first year in the SEC. What they did, Steve Sarkisian, he's earned some benefit of the doubt when it comes to replacing skill players and the machine continuing to roar along. So though they've lost some talented pass catchers, he again has kind of earned the benefit of the doubt on that. If I'm going overrated, underrated, I don't know how comfortable, having said all that I am with Texas as the nation's best team. I don't know that Texas winds up number 1 when it's all said and done, but I do think number 1, number 2 right here in this poll, Texas, Ohio State, is a reasonable illustration of what a lot of people nationally think. I don't think it's just made for TV. I think that's how a lot of people feel in the media going into this season, that Texas and Ohio State could be 2 teams that we're talking about playing once and then maybe playing for a national title later on down the line. Penn State, I know a lot of people really high on Penn State as well. So those 3, I feel like, have been the offseason in a class of their own. Ohio State, again, with Jeremiah Smith, though they replaced the quarterback, you got turnover there. You got, arguably the best player in college football in Jeremiah Smith. He's a superstar talent. So I don't know that it is just all made for TV ratings with those 2. I think that there's just a lot of folks in the media that like those couple of teams at the top of the poll. What about Texas at number 1? Justified? They got 28 first-place votes.
Yeah, I think it is. I'm a believer in Arch Manning. I think he's the real deal. I'm hoping, at least fingers crossed, that he's the quarterback of my Pittsburgh Steelers in 2026 if everything goes well and he, plays up to the caliber that we all think he can. And as you mentioned, other Steve Sarkisian system, he's great at returning those offensive skill players, but their defense is really good. Their defense, their linebacking core is fantastic, and it's been a while since we can say a Texas defense might be the reason why they're winning games. But I think their defense is really good, and obviously Arch Manning is going to get the storylines and the offense and the points. But if Texas gets to where they want to get to this year and accomplishes their goals, it's going to be because their defense rises to the occasion. And their schedule, it's really 5 games that you look at with Texas this year. They have Ohio State, obviously, week 1, and that game is in Columbus. And so, that's a tough task to go out on the road to the Shoe and pick up a win there. And then you have to go on the road at Florida, October 4th, which will, be a tough game as well, at the Swamp. DJ Lagway, I know he's hurt right now, but, that's a quarterback that people think can do some special things this year. And then you have the Red River rivalry game with Oklahoma, which is usually kind of a coin flip most seasons, kind of like Iowa versus Iowa State. No matter how good or bad one team is, you know that you're going to get the best game from the other team in that one. And Oklahoma's feeling good with John Mateer this year, and so that's a game that could go either way. And then they got to go at Georgia on November 15th, which will be tough, and then they host Texas A&M, another top 25 preseason team, in the last game of the regular season. So, if you lose to Ohio State and you lose to Georgia, that's already 2 losses on the docket. And then you got to be perfect against Florida and Oklahoma and A&M in the last week. And so, it's not like it's a tougher schedule in those 5 games, but they get, Kentucky and Vanderbilt and Arkansas, the rest of the SEC schedules. So they should take care of business there, but it's going to be tough. 3 of their 5 toughest games this season are on the road, and so it'll really come down to that. I'm a believer in Arch Manning. I'm a believer in the talent But some of those big games on their schedule could cost them a spot in the SEC championship game. I still think that they'll make the playoff with the expanded 12 teams, but they got to take care of business against every other team. And if they can split Ohio State and Georgia on the road, I think they'll feel really good about their season.
Let's do a little overrated, underrated in the poll. Underrated Iowa, I think absolutely could be in this poll. I think Oklahoma on the outside looking in because of a name you mentioned, John Mateer, could be in that underrated category. We're going to find out about them early, and they will meet one of the teams that I think is overrated in this poll, in the Michigan Wolverines in week 2. I was floored to see Michigan as high as number 14 in this coaches poll. We don't know about Underwood. This was a Michigan team that until they upset Ohio State at the end of the season last year, until they beat Alabama, it was a bad offensive football team. They had a lot of problems a season ago. So not saying that they don't deserve to be ranked going into the year, but 14 nationally for Michigan coming off last year. I was very, very surprised to see Michigan at 14.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure when I was doing research for another article, I think Michigan finished with less passing yards per game than Iowa did last year, which should tell you something about how bad that passing offense was up in Ann Arbor last year for the Wolverines. I was going to mention them as one of my overrated teams as well, just with those with huge question marks at the QB position. Bryce Underwood was an extremely talented player, but it's tough to ask a true freshman to walk on the field in week 1 and instantly turn around, a passing game and a passing offense that was dormant last year. And so I think they're asking a little too much from him if they expect, Underwood to be the answer and the next, game changer at quarterback right away. I think that might be asking a little too much. I look at Miami as well. Losing Cam Ward is huge for them. Xavier Restrepo as well was their top receiver, and he is off to the NFL, I believe. And you mentioned Carson Beck earlier in the show, and he wasn't very good at Georgia last year. And he's got some off the field, I'll say question marks as well with him and his focus level at that position. And Miami was a team that was cruising last year, and then they kind of fell apart at the end of the season, lost some games late in the regular season that kept them out of the playoffs when it seemed like they were going to be a lock for that early in the season. And so I don't know if Carson Beck is the answer there to make them a top 10 team. I'm not so sure about that. But in terms of underrated, I'm kind of browsing this list right here, and I don't know. Illinois is another team I wanted to talk about as being a tad bit overrated potentially. 12 is high for them, and maybe it's just the Iowa fan and me and that Iowa-Illinois rivalry. But I don't know. I love Brett Bielema. I think he's a great coach. Former Hawkeye right there. Luke Altmaier returning at quarterback is huge for Illinois. But they were a team that lost some. They were a team that lost some good talent to graduation in the NFL last season as well, and they're replacing a lot as well. And I'll admit I haven't done as much research on Illinois this season as other Big Ten teams because Iowa doesn't play Illinois this year, which I think is ridiculous. That that wasn't one of the protected rivalries, because I know there's no trophy game, but that's always it was always a big game when they played, and so we won't get to see Illinois this year, which is unfortunate, but. I think they might be a tad bit too high at 12. And then South Carolina as well, maybe a tad bit overrated, although it all comes down to Lenore Sellers if he takes that step and takes that jump that everyone thinks that he could. They're a top 15 team, I think, but there's some big question marks about that. But I'm curious, Josh, who you have as some of their underrated teams who are either on this list or maybe on the receiving votes tab. I know you mentioned Oklahoma and Iowa earlier, but is there anyone else you think?
I think Kansas in the Big 12 has a chance to be, a ranked team by season's end just because of the quarterback. So that would be a team that comes to mind that's in that receiving votes category. I like LSU because of Garrett Nussmeier. I think when, again, you've got the quarterback situation, stabilized. That's a big deal. But LSU has its own questions to answer defensively. They have not played good defensive football under Brian Kelly since he took over down there in Baton Rouge. But I just think LSU will be in the mix for the SEC championship. I think they're going to meet Georgia for the SEC title. I'm not ready to say one or the other's winning the SEC today, but those are the two teams that I think are going to be the best in the SEC. And so if I feel that way, then I think you have to say LSU is underrated. Again, it's so much easier for me to go the overrated route. Like I see a number of schools right here that, to me, I'm just not as high on them. Lenore Sellers, I love him, but South Carolina's replacing a ton of star power defensively. So to me, South Carolina probably a little overrated right now going into the season at number 13. Ole Miss, okay, Austin Simmons they like, but again, I think there's a lot of questions with Ole Miss at 15. Let's see, beyond that, other overrated teams, Tennessee. You got the Aguilar thing going on there where you passed on Nico Iamaleava coming back. Indiana, I think, has a chance to be wildly overvalued in this preseason top 25. So to me, where we sit today, I'm seeing a lot more overrated than I am underrated just within the top 25 that we're looking at. Maybe K-State a little bit. I think they're going to beat Iowa State, and they're my front runner in the Big 12. So K-State, I like Avery Johnson and company in the Big 12. I don't know. What do you say? I just feel like it's easier for me to identify right now the overrated as compared to the underrated.
Yeah, no doubt about that. It's hard to call the number 6 overall team in the country underrated, but I'm a big fan of Clemson this year. I think I'd put them ahead of Notre Dame and maybe even Georgia as well on the top 25. Cade Klubnik is one of the best returning quarterbacks in the entire country, and that defense is loaded with talented players and future first and second round NFL draft picks. And Dabo Sweeney is a great coach who's actually starting to use the transfer portal now for the first time after, being someone who famously did not want to use the transfer portal and wanted to stick to, the traditional ways of building a roster. And so I think Clemson is a team that is maybe being a little over or undervalued, even though they're at number 6 on the list. I agree about Indiana. I think Indiana is last year it wasn't lightning in a bottle for Indiana, but I think that kind of raised what their floor is. I think they're a little overrated based off of that. Like I was doing a piece on the Big Ten coaches ranking, and they had Kirk Ferentz at 6, and I was scrolling up the list to see who was above him, and Lincoln Riley was at 5, and James Franklin was at 4, and Dan Lanning was at 3, and then it was Kurt Cignetti at 2, and I was like, that's insane after one season at Indiana to call him the second best coach in the entire conference behind Ryan Day. I mean, Dan Lanning and the squad just had a great season, and I know that they fell apart in that playoff game, but he's been consistent with it. James Franklin, as much as we like to clown on him for not winning the big game, he's been consistent as well. So I mean, I think the love for that after one season, if they do it again, if they win 9-10 plus games again, I'd be willing to have the conversation. But I think until you prove it more than once, I'm going to wait and see approach, which is why I'm really excited for that Iowa-Indiana game in Iowa City. I think that's a game that Iowa will have a lot to prove against Indiana. And yeah, as Kenton mentioned, Indiana didn't play a great schedule last year, and their biggest game they went and played Ohio State and really got humbled a little bit, and then they played Notre Dame in the playoff and also didn't play very well in that game. And now you lose Curtis Rourke off of this team, and Fernando Mendoza was good at Cal last year, but going from Cal in the ACC to Indiana in the Big Ten is a big jump. And they bring back some good players on defense. D'Angelo Pons, the cornerback, is returning for them, and Elijah Surratt, the wide receiver on offense, is coming back as well. So like it's still good talent, but I don't know. I think just a tad bit overrated. I don't have the schedule in front of me to see who they're playing this year, but outside of Iowa. But I think they're a little bit overrated as well, being there at 19. And then some of those other Big 12 schools in the bottom row in that list, Iowa State, we talked about quite a bit, but BYU and Texas Tech, I feel like have a lot of question marks about them. And so I have doubts that they'll finish as a top 25 team. And even Boise State hiding there in the corner at number 25. I mean, Ashton Jeanty was an absolute star last year for them. He's the best running back in the country by far, even though I love Caleb Johnson. But Boise State, that's so much production that they're losing from Ashton Jeanty. And we saw how they looked against a top team in Penn State, where Penn State said, we're gonna stop Ashton Jeanty and we're gonna basically dare you to throw every single down. And we saw how that ended for Boise State. So I'm curious about them, sneaking into that top 25. I'm not sure if they'll finish there at the end of the season.
Couple of comments from you, the people on Iowa Primetime Live. This is Iowa at the Voice of College Football. And please follow us at the VOCFB. I am at Josh on Ref. He is at Zach_Heine. And everybody should be following our written work as well at Hawkeyes Wire on Twitter, on Facebook, you name it. Okay, a couple of comments from the folks out there. T. Hink, he says, in my opinion, polls are nonsense. It just gives something to talk about. T. Hink, you're not wrong, but look at this. We've gotten 40 minutes out of a preseason top 25 poll. So doggone it, we're keeping the poll. We're going to keep talking about the poll. We're going to keep debating the poll and arguing about the poll. Doesn't it make it feel like football is so much closer that we have a legitimate top 25 poll to debate, discuss, react to? I hear what you're saying. You're not wrong, T. Hink. I would not be of the camp that's totally opposed if you said, hey, we're going to wait until you get a month into the season or 6 weeks into the season, kind of, like you see with the college football playoff rankings before anything gets unveiled. All of that makes sense. And yes, you're making a logical argument that that's a better system or formula to operate by. But again, we've gotten 40 plus minutes talking about this top 25 poll, and you got to enjoy it, right? I mean, it gives us something to debate, argue, discuss. Illinois at 12, come on, that's ridiculous. You heard our thoughts. We agree. We think that's a little bit too high for Illinois, though I love Luke Altmaier, and we both love Coach Bielema as well. Cody chimes in. I love that Iowa's not in the top 25. Some of their best years are when they fly under the radar. They will certainly get the opportunity to do just that this season. Scott jumps into the show. Hello, fellas. Until Iowa can prove they can win one on the big stage, as in upsetting, say, Oregon or Penn State, they won't get any respect. Until then, we're waiting for respect. As a Hawkeye fan for 49 years, that's got to happen. As always, go Hawks. That is true. That's when you got your big opportunity, Penn State, Oregon at home, to really earn respect. But Iowa needs to handle its business beforehand versus, again, an Iowa State team on the road in week 2 that if they beat Kansas State, I'm not forecasting that. I think Avery Johnson and company win across the pond in that season opener between those two. But let's say Iowa State does, then, okay, that's going to be an early opportunity on the road versus a consensus top 25 team in Iowa State that has the quarterback back. So that's a big opportunity to impress. Indiana obviously is in this top 25 at number 19. So depending on how the start of their season goes, you asked about the schedule for Indiana, Zach. And I can report Virginia will not be on the schedule for Kurt Cignetti in Indiana. They bumped them from the schedule. Old Dominion, Kennesaw State, Indiana State, they've got a big date versus Illinois the week right before their trip to Kinnick. So it's possible. You can certainly paint a picture. I mean, look, they're going to be 3-0 going into the Illinois game. So basically you're saying, okay, do you like Indiana at home versus Illinois better than the Illini, or do you like the Illini to go win that game? I like Illinois a little bit better than Indiana going into this season just based on everything they return. But Indiana's at home in that game. So it could very well be an unbeaten Indiana team that you're talking about coming to Kinnick Stadium versus Iowa. So that's a couple of really big opportunities for Iowa to impress early before you ever see Penn State and Oregon on down the road. Cheviota, only one G5 team in the top 25, and one of them gets to make the playoff. That's an interesting observation. So, yeah, I mean, you can look at the poll, and Zach, there's just Boise State kind of lurking out there. That's it.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the others receiving votes to find the other G5 teams, and looks like Memphis is the next one at 34 votes. Army, the academy school there at 33. Tulane at 31. So, I mean, there's a couple other schools there receiving votes. Navy on that list as well with UNLV. But, yeah, it's an interesting observation that the G5 teams only have one in the preseason top 25. Not necessarily surprising per se, because the G5 teams don't usually get a lot of respect from national coaches and media preseason or even during the season. And they just got the respect that they deserve with the mandatory inclusion in the 12-team playoff a few years ago. But we've seen they haven't gone super well in the playoffs when a G5 team has made it. Boise State last year, Cincinnati in 2021 was a team that struggled under the head coach who's now at Wisconsin, whose name I know and for some reason am blanking on right now, Luke Fickell. I just wrote an article on Wisconsin, so I'm not sure why I blanked on that. But
it's forgettable at Wisconsin. That's fair to say.
They've been very forgettable, and that's a game that for Iowa too. That's it's tucked right between Indiana and Penn State this year, on the road at Camp Randall in Madison. They're going to be jumping around up there. Well, maybe by the time the fourth quarter starts, depending on how Wisconsin's new air raid offense works this year. But that's a big game too, along with Minnesota between Penn State and Oregon. It's those games on the margins that Iowa's got to take care of business, because if you don't take care of business in those games, it's not that Penn State and Oregon don't matter, but they might be seen as more of a fluke than, this team is for real. This team is one that could make a run here and go for double-digit wins. And so for Iowa, I'm looking at that Rutgers game week 4 right before Indiana, and then the Wisconsin and Minnesota games that are in there too. They can't overlook those teams. It might be easy to look ahead to Indiana or look ahead to Penn State and Oregon, but those are the games that Iowa's going to have to take care of business in if they want to have the season and the level of success that we think that they're capable of.
So I won't take everything from behind the paywall, but because probably many of you are, hey, what the heck's going on at Iowa's camp right now, right? You want to know something. I will climb the paywall for at least one piece of it, and I'll give proper credit where credit's due. This is from David Eichholt's Monday tidbits surrounding Hawkeye fall camp. And again, I would, as we traverse the paywall here, I would say Iowa 247, the team is awesome. Eichholt, Sean Bach, they just added Elliot Clough. I think they do a sensational job. And this VIP content, if you are an Iowa sicko and you want every little last morsel of information, I would just say pay for a subscription to support those guys and get all of the recruiting news as well. But I'm just going to read one paragraph from what he shared today, okay? Iowa's wide receivers are off to a flying start through the first few days of fall camp. There has been some intense competition with the defensive backs and a lot of chirping. Healthy competition pushes everyone forward. Mark Gronowski is working on the timing with his receivers, but they've had a handful of standout plays among different players. Competition at cornerback 2 and 3 is still ongoing, which shouldn't be surprising. But Iowa's wide receivers off to a flying start, the reports out there.
Yeah, I mean, that's great news for Iowa Hawkeye fans who are hoping to see some major improvement and consistency within that room in 2025. We saw Reese Vandersee have 2 or 3 games where it's like, whoa, this kid is something special, and then he got hurt and just kind of phased out of the lineup. And Jacob Gill was your most consistent wide receiver, but he had just about 400 receiving yards, which when your top wide receiver, your most consistent receiver, has 400 receiving yards, it says a lot about where your offense was at last year. But I think he's a guy that could really break out this year and have a great year at that position. And then it's the question marks behind him. Sam Phillips, the Chattanooga transfer, what are you going to get from him? More of a slot wide receiver than anything else. And then we get into Seth Anderson, Jerry Bowie. What does the depth look like in that room? So I'm happy to hear that the wide receiver room seems to be playing well so far in camp, but I'm more of the belief where I got to see it in regular season games, and not against Albany in week 1 or UMass in week 3. Like we saw Iowa's offense, the passing game explode in week 1 last year, and they were torching the defense for big plays. Who was it that they played in week 1 last year? It was I'm trying to remember, but I think Bannersley had
I want to say Illinois State.
Illinois State, yeah. I think you're right about that. I think it was Illinois State, who I believe is another FCS school. And so it's nice when ST King, thank you for the confirmation in the chat there. It was Illinois State. But it's nice to see the big plays and the offense look good and the wide receivers look good against an FCS school, but can they go do it at Iowa State in week 2? Can they do it when Indiana and those talented DBs come to Kinnick in week 5? Like that's what I want to see. I want to see the receivers making plays there.
Can they take it on the road too? Before that, yep. Obviously at Iowa State, but at Rutgers in Piscataway, that's not been an opponent that has beaten Iowa. That's not been an imposing place for the Hawkeyes to go play. But look, every road test, you got to go answer it. And on this note, on this subject, I take you back to Big Ten Media Days a little more than a week ago. And Kirk Ferentz was asked about the growth of the offense in year 2 under one Tim Lester.
Ironically, none of our top 3 quarterbacks were here last fall, so they're all going through the same thing. But for the overall group, for the overall offense, everybody, it's a lot more fluid now because it was all new a year ago. I said earlier, I've never in my career been involved in a West Coast offense. Certainly knew about the NFL. It's a very different offense in terms of communications. It's very wordy, a lot of verbiage. And I've always been in systems where it's as concise as possible. So that was an exchange, but it was a bigger exchange for me because I have a bigger knowledge base. Our players took to it real easily, but everything's a lot more fluid now than it was certainly a year ago, and quarterbacks are doing just fine with it.
So there you go. Wordy. It's a West Coast offense, and that's some of what we had heard over the course of last year, that, just the timing, the nuances of all of it, it wasn't going to be immediate. And I wouldn't expect installing an offense to be immediate overnight with Tim Lester and company. And if it's something different than what you've been doing, then hopefully, Zach, the expectation is that, okay, you went and got a quarterback that you love in Gronowski. We keep talking about these wide receivers. Early impressions are that they are very, very impressive to begin camp, and now you just got to go do it, right? Now we should see that progression.
Yeah, and I want to see the offense. If I see one more 2nd and 14 draw play, or a 2nd and 15 screen play, like I'm gonna lose my mind. I'm hoping that we're past that with the Tim Lester offense and this West Coast offense. Take risks and take chances and be aggressive. I think that's really what Iowa fans want to see from an offense. And obviously there's lines with being aggressive. You don't want your quarterback throwing 2 to 3 picks a game, obviously, but be aggressive. Can we see a 1st and 10 play action shot potentially, or if you get sacked on 1st down, can we see someone being aggressive on 2nd and 18 and going down the field instead of just running a draw and settling for the punt? I think that's what Iowa fans want to see.
What do you think of this from Thor? It's an interesting observation. Does that mean Helinski is number 3 over Stratton?
I would hope so. And I'm not trying to be offensive to Jackson Stratton, but like it was a struggle for him when he played in those games late in the season last year. Iowa didn't seem very comfortable running any passing plays with him on the field. We saw that in that Nebraska game, especially just how limited the offense was with him there. And I'm sure he took a big jump this offseason with another year of being comfortable in that Tim Lester system. But I think Hecklinski, the transfer from Wake Forest, I want to say it is. Yes. Being a younger guy too, I think there's a higher upside with him and a chance for him to be around the program longer. Because I think Jackson Stratton's a senior this year, or is a junior, and Hecklinski is a redshirt freshman or redshirt sophomore. So there's more time for him to potentially be an answer post Mark Gronowski. Obviously, Hank Brown seems to have that backup spot locked up. But I would like to think that Hecklinski can win that third spot. And hopefully, no offense to him, hopefully we don't see him this year. Mark Gronowski is on the field for the entire season, or Hank Brown gets some mop-up duty against Albany and UMass. But I think it's good that he would be in that third spot.
Maybe I'm nuts, but I feel like Jackson Stratton can freaking rip it. And
I think he was done dirty last year. I think the play calling changed a lot when he got into the lineup, and I think they were more concerned with him not turning the ball over instead of letting him have a chance to rip it and see what happens. And so I think it was more of a Kirk Ferentz executive call when he came into the game, more so than a knock on his talent, because we've seen him rip it, and the arm strength is real. But I think they got very conservative with the offense with him in there last season.
Kirk Ferentz, again from Big Ten Media Days, he's Zach eager to watch this cornerback competition unfold.
Eager to see, really anxious to see. I think, first thing, the two guys that played the most, TJ and Deshaun, both took big steps in the spring. They've played, but they were surviving. And I don't mean it maybe in those terms, but, they're capable of doing better, hopefully down the road. And that's part of the growth process. And really saw them start to take those strides and have some of the confidence that you hope a guy has this spring. So I think they both improved, and they're really good prospective guys. And I've got a lot of love for what Jalen Watson does. I think, he saw him do things on special teams that are really hard to do. I'm thinking about one particular punt. He was blocking their gunner right in front of our bench, and he did a really nice job. And that's really hard to do. I'm thinking about Dallas Clark blocking as our center on the kick return team 25 years ago. But when you see guys do some things on special teams, you can easily see that carrying over to what they're going to do in their roles. And so he'll be in the middle of it. And then we brought Shaheed in. I think he'll be in the competition. And so I described the big podium. I think we've got a lot of positions right now. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. And that's a great thing about having the month of August. We got a month to evaluate and see where guys are at, because it'll look different than it did in April. And, I think it wouldn't shock me, even in September, we'll see more of that as we go.
Okay, so anything jump out there? We knew TJ Hall, Deshaun Lee, very much in the thick of things, and were listed atop the depth chart, respectively, at corner to begin the spring, but that's not an end-all, write-it in Sharpie be-all. Jalen Watson, Shaheed Barrows, the other couple of names that Kirk Ferentz mentioned there. Anything stand out?
Nothing too crazy. I as you mentioned from the spring depth chart, those four were the four who were the starters, and then the projected backups to the starters. And so, nothing too crazy stands out for me. Obviously, they're going to be asking a lot out of TJ Hall and Deshaun Lee to step up into big roles this year. And then Shaheed Barrows, the transfer, should be some good depth for them as well. But I'm excited about Jalen Watson and the shout that he got from Kirk Ferentz at media days. I think that's a really good sign for his playing time, and it's always good when their coach gives you a special shout out by name at media days. And so it's good. He proved it on special teams last year, as Coach Ferentz mentioned, and now he's going to get a chance to do it at the cornerback room. But I think there's a lot of question marks about the ceiling of that group. Obviously, Iowa didn't have a mention or a preseason mention for the Jim Thorpe Award, and this is a secondary that's won numerous Big Ten defensive backs of the year and Jim Thorpe Awards in Kirk Ferentz's tenure. So that's a largely unproven group if we're going to throw the safeties in there as well with Entringer and Zach Lutmer. And obviously, Xavier Wampa is probably your most experienced member returning in that secondary. But I think the cornerback room overall, it's more of the same with that wide receiver room, where it's a wait and see. We've seen some good stuff from TJ Hall and Deshaun Lee in their careers, and we've seen some not so good stuff. And so can they put together a season with more of the good stuff than the bad stuff? That'd be the question mark for me.
So Buck Wild says, Zach will hold you to that about pulling your hair out if we're not aggressive. You're too young to lose your hair already.
I hope I don't have to, but if I see another draw play on a second and long, I might have to start.
We'll just have to get you to buzz your head if that happens. How about one more? You want one more audio cut before we get out of here?
Yeah, let's do it.
We've gone over the limit here, but that's all right. We're hanging out. We're having fun. Here was Kirk Ferentz, Big Ten Media Days, talking about Iowa's defensive line transfer portal additions.
I think if we've learned one thing, it's the more you can get players that it's like just like recruiting high school players. You want to get guys that are going to have a chance to really fit in what we do and how we do it. And both those guys have done a great job. So they're two different stories in that, Jonah's a fifth-year guy or a sixth-year guy, whatever he is, but he's a grad transfer. So he's older and he'll help us. There's no question about that. And then, on the other hand, Bryce is a little bit younger. And the only thing he isn't is tall. But, neither is Noah Shannon, neither is Mike Daniels. I'm right down the list. We're not big on that. But I'll tell you, he's got a great attitude. He's a really good football player. So I'm really confident both those guys are going to really help us this year. They're going to play a lot of football, and it was kind of our approach. We looked at a couple spots where we really needed to address our depth issues, and both those guys are exactly what we were hoping for, just like the quarterback. So we've been lucky that way, and you hope you bring guys in that are excited about coming too. And that's the other part of it. And both those guys, they think they're in the best place ever, which is great. And that's how we wanted to feel.
Okay, so a little from Kirk Ferentz on the defensive line additions for the Hawkeyes. And just based on that, Jonah Pace sounds like someone that he's older, and Iowa and Kirk Ferentz feel like he can definitely help them right now. And not that Bryce Hawthorne can't, but he's younger, and we know Iowa likes to develop its talent that maybe that would be closer to a year away. But some of Kirk Ferentz's remarks from Big Ten Media Days. Hey, that's it for us. Thursday night, let me invite everybody, come on back, baby, to Iowa Primetime Live here, Iowa at the Voice of College Football. Like and subscribe. Share this video. Share this podcast. And just search Iowa at the Voice of College Football wherever you consume podcasts to get us this evening and on Thursday night at 6 o'clock, wherever you consume your podcast. Please search for us, and obviously like, subscribe, and share. That's the best way to keep growing this thing as we ramp up to football season. That's it for us tonight, though. For Zach, I'm Josh Elmer, and one more time, at the VOCFB, please follow the Voice of College Football there. Search the Voice of College Football on Facebook, etc., etc. And that's how you can follow everything, not just Iowa, but everything in college football from the Voice of College Football. Follow us. Zach, tell the people where they can find you.
Yeah, at Zach_Heine, just as you see it spelled on the screen right there on X. And I have a link there to Hawkeye Wire and all the work that we do over there. We'll obviously want to plug that. And we're going to be covering a lot of that media day and kids day practice this weekend. So make sure that's your first stop in the morning is to open up Hawkeye Wire and see what we have up for you to read.
Love it. And you can follow me at Josh on Ref. And I would just say at Hawkeyes Wire on Twitter and on Facebook. Until Thursday night, Zach, Hawkeye fans, everybody, have a great week. We'll talk to you Thursday night at 6 o'clock. So long and go Hawks.